Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian of Sports Info Solutions, joined by Alex Vigderman and James Weaver of the SIS R&D team. We've got our producer, Justin Stein, with us as always, and today we're here to break down some free agency. Alex and James collaborated and basically wrote an article where they broke down I'll let Alex describe the system, but they broke down basically what we can expect based on total points in a pretty simple system that should be giving us some signal, basically, and how that compares to how much they got paid this offseason. So we can kind of find where there are good and bad value deals. Here at Sports Info Solutions, we love players getting paid. So I am not going to ever criticize. I'm going to make an effort this podcast to not criticize a team for overpaying a player, but to congratulate that player for getting his money. Because too often, I think we do it the other way.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment. And I think that, in fact, I've had moments over the last couple weeks where I was on some podcast recently and we were talking about the franchise tag conversation. And afterwards, a few days later, I was thinking like, man, I probably could have been a little bit more of a player advocate in talking about the values and that sort of thing. But
yeah, it's a funny little place that we end up because you're always trying to think of efficiency and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I don't think any of the three of us would advocate like only looking at things from a math standpoint of how efficient can we expect you to produce in the future. Like there's something to be said for treating people the right way and what might motivate different people. I don't know, James, am I speaking for you there?
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can crunch the numbers and build all the kind of fancy spreadsheets we want, but end of the day, that might not matter for some players. But yeah, I agree there.
Daniel Jones, my Duke friend. There are no hard feelings here. Congratulations. I'm truly proud of you.
Yeah, I think so. I think that my position on this might be informed by where I sit in terms of the continuum between a front office employee and a player. Like I have an easier time empathizing with the front office decision makers than I do with the players in terms of my ability to like visualize myself in that situation. So I would imagine that that's at least part of it. Like if I was a former college player and I thought about going pro, but people in my life I talked to and decided that it wasn't necessarily going to be the path for me. Like I might have seen that as a much closer thing and therefore think more from the player's perspective.
I've played football. I haven't played football professionally, and I've definitely never owned any sort of a team. And this year, and I have obviously worked in front offices, but to me, this is about, I feel more player advocate than an owner advocate. And like the front office people, we're just puppets.
Oh, to be clear, like I'm not, well, yeah, that's different. Yeah, that's a different conversation. I'm not saying that I do like intellectually prefer.
No, but as a fan, you think of your team. You don't think of...
Yeah, exactly.
I get it. All right. Anyway, not to take this conversation in a weird like Marxist tangent, but let's talk about the players. Alex, what sort of approach did you use when you sort of projected these players out over the length of the contracts that they signed?
Yeah, we're evaluating the means of production for talking about Marx. So this basically took two like fairly simple projection concepts and smushed them together basically. So we have total points, which is our general player value metric, and we used what is called a Marcel system, which is a name from Tom Tango on the baseball side of things from 2 decades ago now, I think. Like a monkey could do this, and it's
named after the monkey from Friends, right?
That's my understanding. Yeah. So the idea being that it is a system that is so simple that any advanced projection system needs to at least be able to do better than this to be considered a viable projection system. And in fact, we're using a slight variation on that system in terms of the weighting between years. But basically, it's taking the last 3 years of production and it's weighting the most recent season more than the previous season and the previous season. That includes playing time, which will come into play when we talk about some players who have like missed time over the last couple of years. But theoretically, players who have had injury problems in the recent history, that does inform what we would project for them. So that's one piece.
So basically, you are taking total points and with a very simple system, basically looking at the last 3 years, weighting more recent season more than the 3 seasons ago, and projecting based on that how much they'll play and how well they'll play per snap based on that.
Exactly. So you have two pieces there, per play performance and the number of plays. And then the second piece that is added in is an aging factor, which again is a relatively simple construct. It's basically taking all the players that we have in our database going back to 2016 and looking at from one age to the next, the change in per play production or in snap count that you'd expect on average. And there's a little bit of smoothing there because we're also doing it by position, because obviously there's different aging that I would expect for running backs than for offensive linemen, that sort of thing. Sorry, running backs. And we're also smoothing the age part because people like Tom Brady ruin aging curves. So we have to make sure that we're doing a little bit of accounting for small samples at the edge. The good news is that the kinds of players we're talking about today aren't 22 years old or 42 years old. So we don't have to worry about that too much. But the idea is basically that we are taking that Marcel projection, which is basically assuming that you're going to be as good as you have been, and adding in an aging element, which is also useful for when we project for 4 years from now to get a sense for what we might expect from a player in 4 years. The consequence of that is that we discover that the aging curves are extremely pessimistic. Basically, players start declining in terms of production as soon as they enter the NFL, which is actually consistent with what we've seen in baseball and some of the research that I've done. And then also playing time, you get a little bit more playing time sort of through that rookie contract, and then your playing time starts decreasing on average after age 26 or so.
So build through the draft.
Yeah. That's when you're going to get your cheapest producers and arguably your most reliable producers. They haven't been worn down by life as much yet.
And Players Association, take this into account next negotiations, going back to our initial team.
Yeah, I mean, they're in a much better spot than again, comparing to baseball. Like young players in baseball really get the shaft compared to young players in football. So
yes and no. More players on a football team, and I think shorter careers on average. But yeah, you're not under team control for 6 years. But you do have the hard salary cap. You don't have Steve Cohen.
And you have to hang out in like Binghamton and wherever that you're playing minor league baseball, and you're riding buses around and getting paid below minimum wage.
Did you see Edwin Diaz, the Mets closer? Speaking of Cohen, pulled a Grammatica.
No.
Celebrating.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I think he's out for the season. I just got an alert celebrating a World Baseball Classic win. Not ideal for Mets fans. Mets go to Mets. All right, back to football. I think we understand what you put together here. I like it because it's sort of, what do you call it, beautifully simplistic. It's for all the machine learning stuff that we do, and we do our share of that around here. Sometimes the most explainable model is the best model. And this is not supposed to solve the world and be an official designation of how well these contracts are going to perform, but it's a kind of nice way of looking at a pretty good estimate. So without further ado, Derek Carr, what can you guys tell me about the Carr contract?
With Derek Carr, so he signed a 4-year, $150 million deal with the Saints, which puts him 10th in average annual value for this contract. According to our projection, he is ranked 7th on a 4-year curve in terms of his total points. So in that regard, it looks like the Saints got a little bit of value there. Obviously, Carr's coming off a little bit of a down-ish season for him. It's still nothing too crazily bad. He ranked 23rd in SIS's independent quarterback ranking and was tied for 20th in adjusted net yards per attempt. He gets to reunite with Dennis Allen, so that's pretty cool for the guy who brought him in. And over the past couple of years, there's been instability and injury concern with the Saints quarterback room ever since Drew Brees retired. So if they can bring a quarterback like Carr, who arguably is the best quarterback in the division now, and can get them back to the postseason after a 2-year hiatus, I think that'd be a job well done for Carr.
Yeah, I think this is probably, we got to start talking about this as one of the moves of the offseason. The 7th best quarterback in terms of production, even if he was 12th, getting him at that basically Daniel Jones contract value. Yeah, he's a little bit older, but I don't know, Alex, if you could tell me, is a 31-year-old quarterback that different than a 27-year-old quarterback? And I don't really, Daniel Jones, I guess, is probably 25. I don't know. But I like this deal.
I think, yeah. So this is sort of a way of looking. We can use this player as a jumping off point for like a limitation of the way that we're looking at this. Like this is looking at the population of players as they exist now. And like some of the players who are at the top of this list are going to age out and no longer exist at the end of this contract. And then there's going to be plenty of young quarterbacks that are going to come in and sort of change the equation. So this is like comparing to the existing population of quarterbacks But that does mean that part of the reason that Carr ends up aging well in this respect is that there are plenty of quarterbacks who are older than him and similarly productive in recent years that are going to age even worse, right? And or might not even be playing by the end of this contract. So like
is that a limitation or is that a strength?
It just means that he's comparing, like, the rank as you go in time is basically losing viable players. And so that's really the limitation is anybody who's similarly productive right now but is already older is going to decay.
Those players are going to decay faster, whereas the young players who might be really
aren't here
are not going to show up.
Exactly.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah. Say if we say that Bryce Young and CJ Stroud are going to be top 10 quarterbacks in a few years, like, they're not presented here.
Yeah. I don't know. To me, he's been a win-with quarterback. He's in the 10 to 15 range, at least, I think, in terms of where he is.
Yeah, I think that the key, I think a good reason to include him as the sort of most compelling is it's a huge deal. And I think people see the number and they're like, whoa. And of course, they've seen other Saints contracts and have gone, whoa, of recent vintage. But like his production is definitely more than what a lot of people think of his production.
Yeah, I'm looking up. Do we know what guaranteed money is on the deal? Because I thought it was about 80. I thought it was basically like 2 years were.
Yeah, that's the thing that another thing that we're sort of not accounting for is the extent to which the contracts are sort of manipulatable.
60 fully guaranteed at signing and 100 in potential guarantees. Just looking at a quick reporting of it there. That basically sounds like that extra $40 million is probably either guaranteed for injury only or will lock in, at some point over time. But like, yeah, this is better. Like, like I said, I'm really happy for Daniel Jones. I guess I'm not as happy for Derek Carr following that same logic. I think it's a good move for the Saints.
I think that considering I think it's a fine thing for Derek Carr if for no other reason, like James was talking about, like the coaching staff wanting him. I think that there had been a lot of like not great vibes in Vegas. And so I think that getting an opportunity to get paid commensurate with his value and have a little bit more like respect from the organization and buy-in and that sort of thing, I think has importance as well.
For sure. All right. I like that deal. You guys like that deal?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not any contract like this. We're not going to talk so much about the biggest contracts necessarily that have been signed here, and part of that is that some of them are kind of uninteresting in a sense, right? You just pay, the best player available. You pay the going rate for that player, and you probably pay more than you should because there's a winner's curse involved in signing players to contracts. So I think Carr is an interesting example because it is a lot of money, but it's for a player that I think is a little bit undervalued.
And we should mention this article is available on sportsinfosolutions.com if you want to check it out. You can see Alex and James's work there. All right, let's go to the guy that is replacing Derek Carr in Las Vegas, Jimmy Garoppolo, also 31 years old. The contract was 3 years, about $73 million. So a little shorter, a little bit less there. What do you guys make of that one?
Yeah, so his average annual rank value there, he's at 16th, obviously right dab at the middle of the starting quarterback in the NFL, which, arguably, that's probably where he is. His 3-year production rank is 23rd. And in terms of like limitations, like we discussed about before, obviously Jimmy's missed some time with injuries or just not being a starter in this past season. So that's kind of where you see that production dip off a little bit. Obviously in San Francisco, his efficiency metrics have been high due to the fact of how they've played. He ranked 8th in IQR and was tied for 3rd in just in net yards per attempt this past season. And over the last 4 seasons, he's been top 20 in IQR in general. And taking him from a San Francisco lineup that included the likes of Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, etc., and then plugging him right into 2 more great weapons in Devontae Adams and Josh Jacobs, pairing him with the good vibes, as you mentioned before, with Josh McDaniels, his former offensive coordinator in New England. It certainly seems like a good spot for him to kind of maybe finish off his starting years in the NFL.
Yeah, sort of a low-risk move. The thing you probably like best about it is that the upside of sort of reuniting him with McDaniels there and potentially in a short sample, they had some good success together in New England. So maybe that's, and there's familiarity, obviously, and this theoretical scheme fit there. And also, if they want to draft somebody and they want to develop somebody behind him, they've got that available to them too. So if they didn't think Carr was their guy, which clearly is the case, I think this is a very sensible move and sort of they, slide right in. He's getting about $25 million this year. which sounds like a lot of money, but really for a quarterback, that's pretty good bargain.
Yeah, and so I'm curious, Matt, do you think that I actually think that the Raiders skill position players are, I mean, nobody has the skill position players that the 49ers have necessarily, but like it's a pretty good group. I think if Hunter Renfrow decides that he wants to be like he was 2 years ago and less like he was last year, I think it's a pretty interesting collection of players, and Jimmy G has shown that he's able to succeed with that. Do you think that he'll be able to translate usefully coming out of that offensive scheme?
I think that he will scheme transfer just fine. Like, I think he's basically going back to the scheme that he got drafted in, and it was get the ball out quickly, do a lot of the stuff that Brady did, kind of run that offense the same way that they liked to run that offense before they've gotten some different people in there lately. So I think he's a distributor. I think that he's got, some limitations, and he's been very injury prone, are the biggest risks there. But like, can he get the ball to Devontae Adams? Can he get the ball to Josh Jacobs? Like, I think they clearly have the weapons there. They got to, fortify up front, I think, a little bit. But in terms of the weapons, I think he can get the ball around. I think he's like average to above average as a quarterback, probably a downgrade from Carr, if you're asking me, but maybe a better fit here. So I would see no reason why he couldn't come into the office and run it competently. If it goes better than that, that might be a bit of a surprise, but I wouldn't be shocked by it, just because this was the vision for McDaniels from the beginning, this sort of a player.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this moves the needle at all, just because like they were kind of in limbo in terms of the moves that they had made last year to get Adams and that sort of thing, and in a division that is not as scary as it was to start last year, but is still a pretty tough division. Like, I do wonder how much I should expect from the team in general, and therefore whether they should be making like big moves at quarterback, but they didn't really make a big move at quarterback. So in that sense, it's fine. They didn't make a big bet that might actually bomb big. If you were to compare to the Broncos, for example, like they didn't make that kind of move to get a quarterback and then not have an awesome team. So in that sense, I guess it's all right. I just wonder if they sort of have stuck themselves in limbo for longer.
Well, I mean, we saw them trade Darren Waller. Could we see them make, like, Jacobs is just franchised? That's like a 1 year sort of thing.
Yeah, I guess that's true. There is an opportunity to kind of, I mean, you'd have to have the picks and stuff to sort of restock the cupboard, but
yeah, it's hard to not want Devontae Adams also, just to try to have a competent offense. He'll be helpful for that. It's interesting. I think that the degree to which Jimmy has success will probably determine how much they sort of the full tank versus really try to build now. All right, let's keep it going. Very interesting one. Orlando Brown Jr. to the Bengals. 4-year, $64 million deal for the 26-year-old, now on his third team. Where is he slotting in there? Is he going to play on the left side? Is he going to play on the right side? Do we know?
I'm pretty sure he's going to play on the left side.
That's where he wants to be, so that would make sense.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. It sounded like when he was talking last night, or put out some tweets that said he wanted to play at left tackle. So he's arguably probably the best lineman the Bengals have now, so I wouldn't be shocked of him getting the choice of where he wants to play.
Right. So as far as the contract goes, not huge money in terms of what we might expect from a left tackle. 4 years, $64 million. What do you guys make of the production versus the player?
Yeah, I think in terms of the value of the contract, it's almost right in between what he produced in 2021, being the 11th highest tackle in terms of total points, and to where he fell in 2022, which is the 32nd. So, he finds himself at 17th in the AAV rank there for tackles. So that's kind of right in the middle. So if you get the good version of him, that's a good deal for the Bengals. And, if you get that version of how he played this year with the Chiefs, probably a little bit better of a deal for him. So I think the Bengals did that good. It does seem like a steal for Browns, or for the Bengals, I mean. So the pro player aspect rhetoric at the beginning of the podcast doesn't fit well here, I'd say.
I think that this is also kind of, I mean, he's a little young. He's certainly young to be on his third team, but compared to some of these other players, like he is a little bit younger than some of these guys who are getting their sort of third deal. And the price,
his second deal, really. I mean,
yeah, sure, you're right. Yeah. So, but I'm saying compared to other players who are on their sort of third contract.
Right. He's 26. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that, and we were talking about him from a franchise tag perspective. Like, I think that at this price, it's a pretty appealing player. And we talked about it last time that there's some risk here in terms of him not necessarily translating at left tackle, and depending on the offensive scheme, that might be a problem. But it's not a super big deal to be that worried about it.
Yeah, I see this one as like a nice sort of risk by the Bengals. I think they really kind of nicely manage their risk here. They gave him a $31 million signing bonus. So basically this contract is like half of it is just we're giving you this money up front, and then it's kind of like you gotta play it out and earn it from there. So super risky in terms of just throwing a big signing bonus. But if you're going to pay a left tackle, you're going to have to give him a signing bonus. So really, in terms of like, if it doesn't work out, it's not like they can't spend more money next year. They won't hamstring him that much. But then where I go is, these are human beings. And do you feel good enough about this human being to pay him that much money and kind of trust that he's going to work for the rest? Because there are NFL players and people in any sort of career that would be very happy to have earned that kind of guaranteed money, that kind of a signing bonus, and then not work as hard. I've seen it happen before, and it's always something you're concerned about on a second contract. And especially for somebody that two teams have sort of had come into their building and then let out of their building. That just raises the sort of risk level there for me. At the same time, the Bengals, sort of have a cheap reputation, but also have a pretty good team right now because they have some really good players. And to the extent that they can sign and play really good players, sort of stealing Orlando Brown, sort of stealing Lyle Collins, and having two bookends based on that, I think that Orlando Brown physically is as high upside as they come as far as the tackle position goes, as being a blindside protector. Ugh, can't believe I used that term right there. But I love the upside here, and sort of for the amount that they paid him, I think it's a great deal as long as he comes to earn the rest of the contract, which I'm gonna assume the best.
Yeah, I think that actually that structure of paying roughly half of it as a signing bonus does make sense sort of for both parties if there is some concern about productivity or motivation or whatever on either side, right? Like, it gets the player to really see that they're being valued and that sort of thing, but also and it's paying enough that like and enough for that to be a meaningful amount to the player, but also not so much that the team feels like totally hamstrung by the cost if it turns out that he's not what they're projecting him to be.
Right. All right, let's keep it going. Let's talk about the Falcons. Our old friend, Stephen Polacek, definitely, I think, with the signing of Jessie Bates, is pro player, as you called it, James. We got to give him a big shout out here because he gave Jessie Bates as safety a 4-year, $64 million deal. I guess that's the same money that would have gone to Orlando Brown coming into Jessie Bates. So what do you make of this one?
Yeah, so this one is interesting. This is probably one of the first ones where the production doesn't necessarily align as much with the price. From an AAV perspective, he's one of the top 5 safeties in the NFL right now. And in terms of projected production, would be more in like the 20th range. So it's already kind of an interesting defensive backfield. Like AJ Terrell has been up and down the last couple of years, but like theoretically is still an interesting prospect. Actually, the top player on the team in terms of total points was not a quarterback, which is as alarming as anything. Your quarterback really should have the most total points. But anyway, Richie Grant, who's really more of like a run stuffing box safety type performer. Last year, he was their biggest producer on the team, offense or defense, from a total points perspective. So Bates comes in and bolsters that secondary, which certainly could use the help after what they've been doing the last few years. The weird thing about him is that he has had the really extreme production seasons the last 2 years. So he was
defensive back with extreme production.
Right. So that's it's extreme. And actually, if you take 2 out of the last 3, you like the 2 out of 3 seasons more than the one. But basically, he was 6th in safeties and total points in 2022, 66th in 2021. And that features the 2021 season. He allowed 15 yards per target, which of course targets for safeties can be kind of weird in terms of like how often they're just sort of keeping the top on the defense and that sort of thing. But when we're able to sort of like assign a target to him, he allowed 15 yards per target in 2021, which is absolutely insane, and was closer to 6 the 2 years surrounding it. So if we trust that as a fluke, then this looks a lot better, because that really drove sort of the average expected production for him over the course of the contract. But if that's, the natural variability of defensive backs, and you could argue that safeties are less variable because of the sort of role that they play and how directly impactful they are from play to play, but like that still exists in general in the way that we think about defensive backs.
Terry Fontenot in Atlanta always loved having really a good safety play. He always thought that was a really great way that you could build a defense, that, having great lockdown corners is good, but those guys are really hard to find, and you can build a competent secondary starting with those safety positions. I'm trying to remember, we overpaid for somebody in free agency while I was in New Orleans. I think Jarius Byrd was the guy. He was with Buffalo, I believe.
Yep.
And I hope this isn't sort of making the same mistake again, getting somebody who was just super productive with another team as a free agent and then sort of being underwhelmed going forward. But I also think you got to build your team the way you believe in building the team. And if he can pair with Richie Grant on the back end there to really become sort of a top tier safety tandem, then all of a sudden you can start to see how this defense could get built out in a really attractive way to help support Lamar Jackson on the other side of the ball.
Snuck that in there.
Had to do it somehow.
All right, up next, let's look at this deal just as its own deal and not as what it is probably related to. But Allen Lazard, Jets, signing him from the Packers, the 27-year-old. What do we make of his value?
Yeah, so this deal was a 4-year, $44 million contract, and that makes him now the 28th highest paid receiver. His Marcel total points value has him as the 37th best receiver. Now, obviously, that was how being that low down the rankings has influence of Devontae Adams being Green Bay 2 years ago, and then him taking the next step this past year. He was Rodgers' favorite target in Green Bay, having 100 targets, which is 36 more than Christian Watson. His 1,200 intended air yards was the most on the team, with 311 more than Watson. And he was also a big play threat. He ranked 9th overall in the NFL in boom percentage, which is a play EPA greater than 1. So if you're just sticking to just the contract and just with Lazard going to the Jets, I'd say this is a good move for them. Pair him up with Garrett Wilson. And then, if that certain someone does come over to the Jets, then this seems like a good fit for everyone involved.
The externality here is strange in terms of what would the value theoretically be of being able to draw Rodgers. The question would be, does that actually exist? Like, is that really the key thing? I don't know. But I do think that Lazard is better suited, not as it's good that Garrett Wilson exists for him. I think that he's not necessarily in kind of a similar way that like MVS was with Green Bay, where it's like not exactly the kind of player that you want to be a central part of your offense, but a pretty useful player, and one that I think that Jets don't necessarily have an analog for right now.
So I just think I said I'm not going to mention it, but it's just total Tom Brady status going to the Bucs. This is the same thing. I think he's trying to assemble whatever he can there, kind of get that group together the way that he wants it. It's sort of like evaluating. You keep doing baseball, I'll do basketball, Alex. It's like evaluating the trade for Paul George when Kawhi Leonard comes along with it. It's hard to just look at it in a vacuum, but yeah, it's like kind of fine. At the end of the day, they didn't pay a crazy amount of money, and he seems like he can be their second or third best target. So I see it as just like kind of a no big deal move. We'll see what happens with Rodgers, but yeah. Up next, James Bradberry, re-signing with the Eagles on a 3-year, $38 million deal. Alex, you've heard me talk about Bradberry as somebody who had an amazing total point season, but I never thought was the best corner on the Eagles. I don't know if you feel the same way, but this contract sort of feels the same way.
Yeah, it's not, but at the same time, it's not really like elite cornerback money, and he's a little older than some players that I guess you would want to pay elite cornerback money. But like there was a lot of thought that he was not going to come back to the team because of the cap situation and how much they needed to pay the rest of the players on the defense. You know, how many players they had to replace or bring back or whatever. So the fact that he's still in the fold is pretty interesting. I do feel like he was probably the better of the two between him and Slay, and certainly in terms of like the price to bring them back and age and that sort of thing. Like I think I'd rather have Bradberry than Slay to sign them going forward. So in that sense, I think it works out.
It looks like they ended up keeping Slay around on the same contract, right, after thinking about releasing him. So theoretically, both guys are back.
Right.
Probably Slay just for one more year. But yeah, I mean, I think based on total points in the season that Bradberry had, you got to love this move. And at that price, I mean, this is not expensive for a corner at all. Hopefully he can defend in man-to-man a little bit better though, because that's where I get concerned with him. Is I don't know if he's always best suited for that sort of a thing.
Well, will be interesting with, defensive coordinator changes and that sort of thing. If there are differences in the way that they scheme things up around him, that might affect his what we would expect.
All right, JuJu Smith-Schuster signed with the Patriots. He's still just 26 years old. Kind of hard to believe. Feels like he's been around forever. What can you guys tell us about the JuJu Smith-Schuster contract in New England?
Yeah, this one was interesting because I thought going into the analysis, I thought his Marcel total points projection would have been a little bit higher than what it is. So his 3-year, $25.5 million deal has him as the 33rd highest paid receiver.
A lot of people think he's better than he is.
Yeah, that's also very true. And yeah, his Marcel total points projection has him as the 51st best receiver. Last year with the Chiefs, he was second in targets, obviously behind the best tight end of all time. But he was third in the NFL in positive play percentage among receivers in general. So he's got those positive plays. He's a guy that's going to go over the middle. He's going to get you, he's going to convert those third downs. And now with Jacoby Myers gone from the Patriots, JuJu will have a chance to step right in and prove that he's the number one option.
You slipped that in there, but we can't.
You say number one option?
Yeah. No. I was going to say number one tight end of all time. That's my gripe. But anyway, number one option is not necessarily wrong. It's just or trying to prove that you're a number one option.
Yeah.
It's more of whether he's well suited to actually be a true number one or whatever. The thing that you think of when you think of as a number one receiver, as opposed to just the.
I mean, he's definitely not that. He might be a true number two at best, but
right.
True number one is a lot faster and better at football than JuJu Smith-Schuster.
But he's number one on TikTok, so it's fine.
That's true. If you look at the TikTok rankings.
And is he the number one option in New England?
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess the other question to me, as big of a question as anything, is like, what is their offense, and are they going to be able to construct an offense where being the number one player matters at all? Like,
right. And I guess that's probably where I should have clarified of the number one option on a Patriots team that's going to go far in the playoffs next year.
Yeah. And, he's a guy that can work out of the slot, do things over the middle of the field. So I think he could be a nice fit there, and he could be productive there, to your guys' point. I think the contract reflects that he's sort of just a guy at this point, and he's third in positive play percentage. He should thank Patrick Mahomes for helping him earn his money, because I think that was more what happened there.
Yeah. And the other thing, like James pointed out, the difference between his AAV rank and his total points rank, but like at that section of the distribution, like those differences aren't that large. So like it's just sort of like a middle of the road receiver with a middle of the road contract.
Samson Ebukam to the Indianapolis Colts, the 27-year-old. Any thoughts there?
I just like the pipeline from the 49ers to the Colts of defensive linemen. DeForest Buckner came over a couple years ago and then was chirping about Javon Hargrave's contract being the same as the contract he signed with the Colts. So that's kind of weird dynamic there. But anyway, bringing over another defensive lineman from the 49ers seems like farming that front seems like not the worst idea in the world. Ebukam, similar, honestly, to the JuJu thing. Like, it's just like a nice mid-range contract for a mid-range player. He'll complement they had a first-round pick, Kwity Paye, who has been kind of a part-time player and that sort of thing, but has been somewhat productive. And so I think that they're sort of filling out their defensive front in a way that doesn't necessarily have the top producers at this point, but has a decent amount of like solid NFL players.
Yeah, nice, efficient deal. Very, very Chris Ballard type move here in sort of every way. I definitely agree there. Last one that we wanted to go through today, Patrick Peterson to the Pittsburgh Steelers. James, out in Latrobe. What can you tell us?
So it is Latrobe, but anyway, so Patrick Peterson comes in on the 2-year, $14 million deal. The Steelers let Cam Sutton go, who signed that $11 million a year deal with the Lions. And the Steelers come in, get a probably presumed Hall of Fame corner, tail end of his career, at a cheaper $7 million. You know, I think this is a good move for the Steelers. Bringing a guy who's been there, done that, obviously one of the best corners to do it. And obviously you might still have some draft prospectus to bring in the likes of a Joey Porter Jr. or Devin Witherspoon in the first round of the draft. But in terms of Peterson, you know, he ranked 31st among corners with 77 projected total points as his Marcel value. So that's right in line with the average annual value of this deal. Last year, he ranked 3rd among corners in pass defense total points, which I think is just with the volume that he saw. And yeah, I think just overall, this is a solid signing for the Steelers, a good cheap deal, and continue to push forward to build out a defense.
Yeah, I think it's a good deal for Patrick Peterson. It's basically a 1+1 deal both ways, right? He'll be under contract, but who knows if he'll stick around for another year playing for them. But where else would you like to age other than in the Steelers secondary with all those great front seven players in front of you and you know, their consistency year after year putting that defense together? I just think it's a nice spot to play. So kudos to you, Patrick Peterson.
And he's aged pretty well. I mean, considering that he's, you know, entering his age 32 season, and he had a pretty good year last year, and it does not have the same like flash that he had earlier in his career. He's not going to be like the shutdown player. He's not going to have big returns and stuff like that. But that shows that he has been able to sort of like adjust to his athleticism declining as he goes along, which is potentially encouraging just in terms of the extent to which he can maintain this over the 2 years of a contract.
All right. As players keep getting signed, keep checking out sportsinfosolutions.com. James and Alex will be adding some updates as some of the more interesting signings keep developing. In the meantime, before we sign out of here, anything else that you guys want to say to the listeners?
Hope you filled out a good bracket. Isn't it wild that team lost that game? Crazy.
Yeah. I'm kind of peek out of the corner of my eye. Did Furman win? I want Furman to win. I've always been a Furman guy. I just like the name of the school.
It's not the most threatening college name, but who am I to say anything? My school's mascot is a Quaker.
All right. On that note, we'll sign out of here. Next week, we will do some NFL draft stuff as we roll out the NFL draft website for Sports Info Solutions. We'll have Nate Cooper and maybe some other guys from his team on to talk draft. For this week, though, we'll sign off. For Justin Stein, our producer, our guests, Alex Vigderman and James Weaver. Are you guys even guests at this point anymore? Or just at this point, you guys are just here?
Yeah, I don't know where the line gets drawn in terms of how frequently, because like people rotate.
Contributors?
Contributors seems fair.
I don't know, whatever's written in the contract.
For all those people, I'm Matt Manocherian from Sports Info Solutions. Thank you for listening to the Sports Info Solutions Off the Charts Football Podcast.